Hello and welcome to the special support section of Melee's Turnwheel. I'm your host, I'm a Melee Kirby, and today we're taking a look at Karel, Karla, Fiora, and Farina from Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade. We're getting pretty close to the end here, only a few episodes left, and I'm very excited to wrap this up and start moving on to other things. Today's episode is going to be a little bit dull, for the most part. I don't love the characters in this episode, but I like a few supports. I think a few of the supports here are really, really good, so I'm excited to talk about some of those. Also, in other news, I got a new microphone. I don't know, I haven't decided yet whether I think it sounds better. It was a more expensive microphone, so I'm hoping it sounds better. Maybe I need to just mess around with the settings because I feel like this was the right decision overall. But I wanna make sure that everything's good. I might end up switching back to my old mic if I can't because I liked my old mic. I thought it worked out pretty well, but I guess we'll see. Okay. Yeah, I don't want to beat around the bush any more than I have to. Let's go ahead and get into these characters, starting with Karel. I'm going to be honest. I started talking about, I took a run at this episode already, and I started talking about Karel, and there's just so little here to go off of. I tried to, talk a little bit about most of his supports, and they're just so fucking boring. I kind of like in the Guy support how the implication is that Guy and him meet up in a year and that Karel fucking kills him, because that's really funny. But his Gites and his Darts support don't even have anything like that to lean on. There's just a whole lot of nothing, especially in the Gites support. It's just Karel following Gites around and them bickering back and forth a little bit. It's not even particularly funny, in my opinion, at least. But the two main supports here that I want to talk about are, of course, his Lucius and his Karla supports. So I already talked about his Lucius support. I talked about how I really liked it because I thought that it occupied this weird abstract space in a way that I couldn't really put into words. I still don't think I'm going to be able to put it into words. It feels very surreal, I guess would be the right word. It feels difficult to believe that this is literally what's happening. I mean, I'm sure it is, because this isn't typically how Fire Emblem supports work. I don't think it's a metaphor or anything. But it feels very surreal, I guess is the best word for it. But from Karel's perspective, there is some more that I want to talk about a little bit as well. I think so. Karel is very edgy. Karel's like, ooh, I need to kill people. My sword hungers for blood or whatever. He's the type of guy that Owain in Awakening is parodying in a really funny way that I enjoy. So I'm excited to get to Owain way down the line. But in the meantime, we got to stick with the ones that the shitty archetypes that he was a parody of in the first place. Karel never really expands on that in any meaningful way. Even in this support, it never really, they never get into the heart of it. But I think Lucius does something here that's very interesting, which is that he gets Karel to stop and think about why he is actually doing what he's doing. And the conclusion that he seems to come to, or at least the implication, is that he doesn't have a choice. It's almost like he can't... It's almost like he can't help himself. It's like a curse or like an illness of some kind. He can't resist. It's this hunger. The way he describes it is that it's this hunger within him that he can't suppress and that he doesn't know how to suppress. And I think what you could very easily read into that is that he has decided to, instead of fighting against it, he has decided to adapt it and make it part of his identity. And then when we see, reading into what came before, when we see him in FE6, he's obviously moved past that. And I think that was, over the course of the years between, he has realized that was something that he could fight against and that he should fight against. I don't know. There's a lot of potential here to do something interesting. Unfortunately, it doesn't go anywhere. I would have very much liked to see, and you could argue that this sort of happens with the Karla support, but I would push back on that, at least in any meaningful way. I would have liked to see them start that process. I mean, obviously, there's 20 years between FE7 and FE6, so I wouldn't expect the change to happen in the events of this game or in the events of any of his supports. But I would have liked to see some of the seeds be planted for that change. And I mean, again, I think you could argue the Lucius support. I think you could argue the Karla support, but I would have liked it to be a little bit more concrete. Speaking of the Karla support, let's move on to that support. and then we can transition to Karla from there. So we learn a little bit about what Karel's deal is from this support. It's not a lot, but it's a little bit. So Karel joins with a Wodao, which is not brought up in the story in any way. Where it is brought up in the story is a little bit in FE6, because Fur also joins with a Wodao, and they talk a little bit about how cool of a sword that is and how they want to kill her to get a hold of it. The implication that the game seems to be going for here, maybe they say explicitly in FE6, I don't remember, but the implication that from these supports at least, is that the Wodao is like some special sword passed through Karel's bloodline, which I think would make sense if he had like a personal weapon that only he and maybe Karla could use, but that's not the case. It's just a Wodao, so I don't think it super lands, but I think that's what they're going for. So what they say in the support is that Karel killed his family, he killed his mother and father, seemingly possibly also other siblings, in order to be the only one who could possibly wield this sword. And he wants to kill Karla too. This is the whole dynamic, is that Karel wants to kill Karla. Karla wanted to find Karel because she has good memories of him from when they were both young. She wanted to see his face, hear his voice one last time before she died, and that's the only reason that she was looking for him. But now he doesn't give. Now she's like, whatever, I don't care. You can kill me if you want to. But before he has the opportunity, she starts talking about their history together, a moment they shared together when they were both young, and Karel decides that she's changing him in some way. It's not really like, I really wish that they expand on this a little bit more. He says, when I'm with you, I remember the past. And he says, like, therefore I must have changed. You've changed me, something like that. And it's like, there's just, they're like starting to get at something interesting, but they don't go any further with it. It feels like they're trying to do something here. There's a line at the end here that I don't super. So Karla talks a lot throughout the support about how she hates being a sword master. She hates being a sword fighter because she never wanted to learn a skill that could only be used to kill people. That's how she explains it. But she did because she wanted to get closer to Karel. And by the end of the support, she's talking about how she is just as bad as him, in the sense that they're both basically soulless, mindless weapons. And I think there's a lot you can extrapolate from this about how, in Karel's arc, especially in FE6, obviously he's learned that you don't need to just, like, if you're a sword master, you can use your sword skills for more than just killing people, right? You can use them to protect people, to defend people. And I think that is a part of his arc, is him discovering that off screen between games, but it is his arc, I think. And I feel like they could have done something with that here, but they don't. I don't know. I think it's interesting that's Karla's perspective on the whole thing, but it definitely could have been expanded upon a little bit more, I think. Eventually, Karel decides to leave her alone, to not fight her, and she says, what does she say? I will wait for you on the Scarlet Plain. I will wait for my brother to come home, which I think is a metaphor for them dying. I'm pretty sure. I don't know. It's not really like expanded upon. Like it doesn't have much build up, so I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that's what they're going for there. It's an okay support. I don't dislike it. I think they do some interesting things, and you can extrapolate some interesting things, but I wish they expanded upon it more. It would really be like this and the Lucy support were the only opportunities for them to go anywhere interesting with Karel's character, and they don't really. They get like part of the way there, but they don't go far enough, which is, the problem that a lot of supports have. But Karel in particular, like there's just nothing interesting going on with his character. And any possibility that there might be is kind of like sidelined or not given enough attention. So overall, Karel is actually an extremely boring and uninteresting character that I don't like. But I'll put a, I don't know what the phrase I'm looking for is, but basically I'm done talking about Karel. That's what I'm trying to say here. I'm done talking about Karel. Let's move on to Karla. Karla actually only has 4 supports. She supports with Karel, which you've already talked about. She supports with Bartray, Farina, and Vida. The Bartray support isn't super interesting, which is kind of a shame because it is basically the canon support. I hesitate to call it the canon support, actually, because In Bartre's unpaired ending, it seems like he marries Karla anyway. So the fact that they have a paired ending together doesn't actually mean that this is the only way that they end up together. In fact, if anything, their paired ending is really weird. I think I talked about this in the Bartre support episode. But it basically, their paired ending implies that Bartre dies, which he doesn't because he's alive in FE6. So I don't know what the deal with that is. But the actual support, that is the most interesting thing about this entire support. The other parts of it is just Bartre wanting to fight Karla. She and him have some back and forth, and then at the end, they kind of have it seems like they have a thing for each other. That's really all there is to it. It's not a very interesting support, unfortunately. The Farina support is mostly just funny. So Farina, Karla's, kind of stoic. She's a little bit naive. There's a lot that she doesn't know about the world because she spent so long looking for Karel that she hasn't really paid much attention to much else. So Farina swoops in and decides that she's going to educate Karla on the intricacies of the world. And some of these are really funny. She talks about how Karla needs to be an independent woman, and make sure that she's making her own wage, she's making her own, living on her own and all that. And it's not funny. The way it's presented is funny. I mean, she's got a point, right? Once Karla's done with this whole crusade to find Karel, she's gonna need to figure out something else to do. So she decides to go. She's like, "Oh, we should go into business together. We should be mercenaries." And Karla's like, "Okay, that's fine." It's not super interesting. Farina is racist in this though. She says that what does she say? So the tribes in Sakai, they all dance around a fire and chant "Ooga Booga," don't they? Jesus Christ. And then Karla, this part's pretty funny. Karla is like, well, I mean, I don't know. I haven't been to Sakai in a while, so maybe. And Farina's like, well, yeah, no, they do. You gotta learn. You gotta read up on this stuff. Come on. It's pretty entertaining. I think Farina is a pretty interesting character, which we're gonna get to. I probably should have done Farina last, actually. The Vita support is up next, and I talked about this in the episode that I did with Lack, where we talked about Vita. It's pretty funny. I like it. I like it a fair bit. I think when Karla is bouncing off someone who's I think when Karla's bouncing off somebody who's a little bit eccentric, I think that it works out pretty well because she plays the straight man pretty well. But otherwise, I don't really have much to say about this one that we didn't already talk about. I don't think it does anything super interesting for her character. I did mention in that last episode that I think it's good characterization for Karla as someone who's humble, someone who doesn't take herself too seriously, and who knows how he has despite being so serious and stoic, she seems to have a pretty good sense of humor. Assuming that she's messing with Vita on purpose, I guess she might not be. Yeah. Overall, Karla, I like Karla more than Karel a little bit, I think, but it's pretty tough. They're both pretty uninteresting characters in my opinion. All right, let's do Farina next. Farina, I think Farina's pretty interesting, honestly. I think Farina, a through line that you see with Farina's character pretty consistently is that she is very preoccupied. I mean, obviously she's very preoccupied with money, but the actual reasons why she's so preoccupied with money, I think, are pretty interesting. I mean, let's start with the Fiora support, because the Fiora support's not only one of her best, but it also kind of expands on why she cares so much about the money. Essentially, it's Fiora and Farina doing some sisterly bickering, which is very cute and endearing, first of all. But it also reveals some history between the two, where Fiora essentially broke one of her contracts as a mercenary to save Farina's life, and as a result, she was put in pretty bad debt. Now, I don't think that that's the only reason that Farina cares about money. Obviously, I mean, even within this support, she gives Farina the money to pay off the debt, so that's not the only reason that she cares about money. But I think that it betrays a couple of things. First of all, it explains. I think it partially explains why she cares about money, right? Even if it's not in this specific instance, she understands that if she's going to be a mercenary, then there are going to be times where she needs to take advantage of people because people are going to take advantage of her, right? To be a mercenary where you are at the beck and call of somebody else to the point where you can't even go and save your own sister's life if it violates a contract, that requires a level of commitment, and you could very easily see that as being taken for a ride. So she's probably like, hey, if they're going to take me for a ride, I'm going to take them for a ride. And she's going to milk people for all that they're worth. But I also think that it characterizes Farina very well as someone who cares more than they like to admit. I think that she has this, I don't know if it's a facade necessarily, like I don't think she's acting or pretending, but I do think that she betrays more compassion and more like interest in things other than money more than she intends to. I think the perfect example of this, and one of my favorite Farina supports, is the Dart support. And I actually like this support even more than when I read it for the Dart episode. I really liked it back then too, but what I missed while doing that episode is I completely overlooked the fact that they had a paired ending where they end up in a relationship together, which is really funny if you think about how their entire support is going back and forth about Dart doesn't care about money. Dart doesn't care about anything other than the adventure. And Farina is both, she thinks he's an idiot, but is also very intrigued by this. And he and her have this really interesting dynamic where they go back and forth. And she clearly is interested in the adventure as well, but she's also like, you gotta, like, what's in it for me? Where's the money coming from? But I think the fact that they end up, falling in love and being together is really interesting because it shows that she likes this dynamic. She likes the fact that he doesn't care about money. She likes the fact that he's this free spirit who doesn't have a care in the world other than where his next adventure is going to be. And I think there's something about that she finds very appealing, even if she also, wants to make sure that she's putting food on the table. The Kent support is kind of like a less interesting version of this, where she basically, she says that he reminds her of Fiora because they're both pretty stuck up. Trust me, we're going to talk about the Fiora Kent dynamic. This is so good. But of course, this support also ends with them being in a relationship, despite the fact that she starts the entire support and the entire B support even as well, talking about how incompatible they are, how they don't, how it doesn't make any sense for them to be together, like for them to fight together. At the end, Kent's like, oh, well, I don't think you're so bad. And Farina kind of like fumbles and she's clearly developing something for him, which just goes to further indicate that she's the type of person that likes to hide her feelings and doesn't let other people in very easily. Although definitely to a lesser extent as some of the other characters we've looked at. I think it's mostly performative. Like I don't think she has like, any problems letting people in necessarily. It's just something that she's not accustomed to. And I think that she tries to put on this front of like, oh, I only care about the money, when really she cares about other people pretty consistently. I think the Hector support is another great example of this, where they go back and forth. It starts off with her negotiating like her salary or whatever. Hector's like, oh, I'm overpaying you or whatever, and Farina's like, blah 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 blah. But over the course of the support, it very quickly, even as early as the Beast support, develops into Hector genuinely being concerned about her and wanting to make sure that she's okay. He very explicitly says multiple times that it's not about the money. He doesn't care about how much he's overpaying her. He just wants to make sure that she's all right. And Farina has a hard time accepting that at first. She insists, like, oh, it has to be about the money. She keeps bringing up the money well into their A support. But when eventually she accepts, like, oh, he does genuinely just care about me, it's not just about the money, then, I mean, they end up in a relationship as well. I just went through all of her paired endings. I don't think I did that on purpose. Yeah. I don't know. I kind of front-loaded her more interesting supports, which is kind of the opposite of what I typically do. I think her Florina support is also pretty cool. It's her basically tormenting Florina with like past memories and threatening to embarrass her and all that, which is fucked up. But Farina does it because she, Florina's changed so much. She's become so much stronger over the course of their time apart that she just wants to make sure that the old Florina is still in there. And the way she does that, I guess, is by tormenting her and making her feel like shit. But that is what it is, I guess. So I think Farina consistently characterized as someone who deeply cares about the people around her and finds joy in things that others do, but that is couched in a level of pragmatism that makes it difficult for her to sometimes let that come to the forefront. And her last two supports, the Karla one is pretty boring. I already talked about that one, and the Dorcas one is the Dorcas one is kind of interesting because she just like gives him money, which again is just another indication that she doesn't actually care about the money that much at the end of the day. She's still willing to be a very generous person. She's still willing to help people in need, even if it comes at a detriment to herself. But it's interesting. I'm glad that they didn't do this route, because when I'm sitting here talking about this and I'm making her sound like she's putting on a front, like she's deceiving people, like she's lying to herself and other people about how much she cares, and that's not really true. I think that like it doesn't take very much for this side of her to come out. I think that it's more like it's more like she's going to care about you, but she's also going to make sure that she's meeting her own needs and doing what she needs to do to take care of herself and the people around her. She knows what she's worth. She knows what other people deem that she's worth. And she's going to make sure that it's a priority as well. She's just very pragmatic. And I think that side of her sometimes comes out before the kind side that we see in some of her supports. But I don't think that she's trying to like keep anything bottled up inside, which is good. I like that dynamic a little bit better than maybe not a little bit better, but it's a nice change of pace compared to how we've been doing a bunch of characters like Sarah and Legalt and some other characters who fit that same pattern of like people who are trying to keep things inside and not let other people in. I don't know. I think it's a nice change of pace. Yeah, that's it for Farina. I went through all her supports, I think, right? Let me just make sure. Yeah, okay, I got everyone. Hector, Florina, Fiora, Kent, Dart, Karla, and Dorcas. Those are all our support partners that I forgot to go through at the start again. All right, let's move on to the last character we'll be talking about today, who is Fiora. So Fiora supports with Farina, Florina, Ellawood, Kent, Sane, Pent, and Geitz. I didn't talk much about this when I talked about this support from Farina's perspective, but I really do like the Fiora-Farina support. I think it exemplifies their dynamic very well, where they obviously care about each other, and they start the support trying to make up with each other, but then they just devolve into insulting each other again, because they're both very it just seems like the type of personality they have. They bicker. That's kind of what they do. Farina and Fiora, I don't know how old they are, but seemingly the age gap between them is like much smaller than for some of the other Pegasus sisters. Maybe not much smaller, but relatively small in comparison to like Tate and Juno, for example. Juno obviously served the role of like a mother figure to the two of them, and I think you could make the same argument for Paula, for Catcher and Est, but Fiora is like not that much older than Farina and definitely doesn't take a motherly role when compared to her. They both seem to be like on equal footing for the most part in their dynamic. So I think that this is a nice change in perspective for the Pegasus sisters of this game to have. I don't think it says much about Fiora's character other than obviously she's very nice. She's very she wants to apologize. She wants to make things right with her sister. She also obviously wants to she prioritizes saving others over her contract, which is very interesting that we see in the Florina support, that she says to Florina, even if maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but she says to Florina, if you take a contract, even if it's one that you don't think you're going to come back from, you need to see it through to the end. And I think there's a couple perspectives you could take from that. First of all, she might just be like, she might understand that is the ideal of a mercenary, while also knowing that she wasn't able to do that herself. Kind of a do as I say, not as I do sort of thing. It's also possible she's talking about, in this instance, she's talking about Florina looking out for herself rather than looking out for other people. Maybe she was saying, if there was an opportunity to save someone that would require you to break your contract, then, maybe don't. It's also possible that she feels like she's learned her lesson about that the first time. She understands that the decision that she made has put herself in a precarious situation, and she just doesn't want that to happen to Florina. That's all possible. I think it's a little bit of a weird contradiction. She also tends to dote on Florina for the majority of the support, but then at the end there, that really kind of like stands out to me as like she because the whole dynamic is that Florina's trying to explain to Fiora that she's not a kid anymore. She doesn't need her protection. She's able to look after herself. And Fiora is coming to terms with that. And the way I guess she comes to terms with that is like, okay, well then you need to make the mature and responsible decisions, including sticking by your contract. It's possible that that's an overreaction to feeling like she's no longer needed by Florina. There's a few different perspectives there. I wish that they had picked one and sort of ran with it. But that's really all they do with it. So I'm not super huge on that support. Speaking of supports I'm not super huge on, her support with Sane is not great. She basically, the Sane supports all read the same to me, for like all of his supports with women at least. She just kind of like always he always just hits on the girl, and the girl usually either like buys into it a little bit or brushes him off immediately. And then it's like they threw darts at a fucking dartboard to decide which ones he was going to end up in a relationship with, because he ends up with Fiora, but he doesn't end up with I'm gonna look at his other supports real quick. He ends up with Fiora. He doesn't end up with Sarah. He ends up with Rebecca. He doesn't end up with Priscilla. He doesn't end up with Isadora. You know, like he it just doesn't make any sense, because his dynamic with, at least in his dynamic with Rebecca, you can see that she was like into it a little bit. They have a back and forth dynamic where she like realizes that he's kind of a pig, and he like apologizes, and then like it ends on a negative note. But you can see that like she does seem genuinely interested in being in a relationship with him if he can get his act together. So you can see where that comes from. Fiora never really gave me that impression. She just kind of is like, thinks he's weird. And then at the end, she's like tolerating him enough to nurse him back to health after he's injured. That's it. That doesn't really go anywhere. So, I mean, it's a fine support. The support itself is like, you know, kind of entertaining, but I don't like the fact that it ends in a pairing for the two of them. I don't think that makes a ton of sense. The Pence support is kind of interesting from the perspective of like knowing that she has been put in debt for breaking a contract to save someone's life, right? Like understanding that she must have some very callous views towards how people see mercenaries, right? From that perspective, like she couldn't even save her own sister's life without getting slapped with a big debt. And so I think Pent showing her that, you know, not all people who hire mercenaries are that callous, I think does a little bit to help her feel a little bit more appreciated. That's about all I got for that one, though. That's not super interesting. Her Geitz support isn't super interesting either for Fiora. I really like this one for Geitz, but for Fiora, it's just kind of him bouncing off of her. If anything, you could say that it's like a little bit, it shows that she's a little bit naive, because she doesn't understand, like, you know, what's going on with his father's boat. She thinks his father's a good person despite the fact that he's not, but it's not like she could have known that. I don't know. I don't think Fiora gets a lot to do in that support. All right, only two supports left: the Ellawood support and the Kent support. The Ellawood support I'm going to start with, despite the fact that Ellawood is obviously the most important out of these three, or out of these two. This is one of Ellawood's three romance options, with the others being Lynn, and of course Ninian. Fiora is definitely the odd one out of this group, and I know that Lack really likes this support. I'm going to ask him to talk about it. If I do a support episode for the Lords, then I'm probably going to ask him to be a part of it. Because I want him to explain the support to me, because like I like it. It's good. I think you know, from the perspective of understanding that of looking at it through the lens of what we talked about earlier, right? With Fiora having negative views about, you know, assuming that people treat mercenaries like garbage, right? And assuming that her role as a mercenary is to be like tossed to the side, right? I can see how this support works from that perspective, right? Because it's all about Ellawood explaining to her, like, no, I don't see you that way. I think you're a person with value. I don't just see you as a mercenary, right? really what it boils down to is that Ellawood is explaining, it helps her understand that she deserves happiness. That's really what the thesis of the A support is. Like, she has these responsibilities as a mercenary and as a sister, but she shouldn't put those priorities over her own happiness and well-being, which is a good message. And I'm glad that like, I just don't see it compared to Ninian. I'm sorry, I'm a Ninian Ellawood shipper. I'm sorry. I get most people are, so it's not like a unique thing or a hot take or anything like that. If anything, Lack's the one with the hot take here. But I do want him to explain to me what he finds so appealing about this. Not that not that it has to be overly complicated. I'm not trying to put him on the spot. I don't know if he's going to end up listening to this episode. But I think I'm very interested to hear what he has to say. I don't mean that like, why could you possibly like this more? I'm very interested to see what he sees in this that I might be missing, So I'm excited to get to that. Overall, I think it's a pretty good support. I think it works for her. I think it's a good paired ending. I don't think it's the best Ellawood romance. I also don't think it's the best Fiora romance, because of course next we need to talk about Fiora and Kent, which is, I think I'm gonna go ahead and lock it in as my single favorite support in the entire game. It is so fucking good. I've read most of them at this point. There's only a few that I'm missing, maybe some Jafar or Nino supports. Some Renault supports are extremely good as well, obviously. And then I like some of the supports with the Lords. Those are the only ones that I'm missing currently. But this support is so good. If you need a refresher, essentially, Kent and Fiora are both very similar people. So they meet, they get along pretty quickly. And then in the B support, the C support's not really anything interesting. The B support, they talk about how the men and women of the camp are getting a little bit too close. There's some moral degradation going on where the men and women are cavorting a little bit too much. They're getting a little bit too close, a little bit too intimate. So they decide that they're going to meet together in private to discuss the details of a plan to help maintain the moral fiber of the camp, to make sure that no men and women are getting too close with each other. And then the A support happens, and they're both very awkward around each other. They're both trying to like navigate a situation that they're going. I'm just going to read you the A support. So Fiora says Kent says Fiora, and they go back and forth. Neither of them are able to get a full sentence out. They're both apologizing to each other. And then they confess that they want to be close to each other. And they both essentially, neither of them either say it out loud. Neither of them say it out loud. But they seem to be like suggesting that hey, once this is over, we should get married. And both of them like are just very much on the same page about that. They're like, there's no hesitation. There's no misunderstanding between the two. They both like, yep, that's what's gonna happen. What the fuck happened in that tent, guys? What happened in that tent when they got together? I don't know. I want to read some fan fiction about it. If you want to send it my way, if you know of some good fan fiction about this and you want to send it my way, I'd be more than happy to read it, because I gotta know, man. I gotta know what the fuck happened in that tent. It's good. It's an extremely good support. It's extremely funny. The way that it uses, if I can talk about it from the perspective of like not just thinking that it's a fun idea. The fact that it uses the negative space, the space in between supports. I believe I used this exact same phrasing in the Kent episode. Because normally the way Fire Emblem supports work is that, part one of the conversation happens and there's a little bit of downtime and there's like lip service to the fact that they haven't talked in a little bit, or that something minor has happened in between, usually building off of the last conversation. But this is the first and only support that I can think of, at least in this game, where the gap between the B and A support is used to this good of an effect. It's so interesting, it's so unique, and I really like it from that perspective. And I'm very happy with the support. It's my favorite support in the game, I think. It's one of my favorite paired endings for 2K, like one of my favorite romances. Kent and Fiora is like maybe my favorite ship in this game. I think it's great. I'm a huge fan. Okay, that is everybody. I like some of these guys. I like not. Dislike some of these guys. I think Fiora and Farina are both pretty good. I don't feel super strongly about either of them, but I also think that both of them are like very solid. Very solid characters with like interesting supports to chew on. I think if I had to pick my favorite, it would probably be Fiora. If for no like, I think the Kent support is kind of like the tiebreaker, right? Like I like both of them about the same, but only one of them has a support that I can say is my favorite or one of my favorite in the entire game. And it's not Farina, it's Fiora. So I'm gonna say Fiora is my favorite for this episode. And we're getting close to the end. I'm gonna be doing we're gonna do the I guess you guys already know who my favorite character from this game is, but the next main episode we're gonna be talking about some of our favorite characters, so keep your eyes open for that. I guess the one after the next main episode, the question is going to be who's your favorite character in FE7, and we'll go from there. But anyway, pretty good set of characters all around, and I am excited to talk about the last few in the next episode, again probably with Lack. We'll have to see. I'm not 100% sure, but that's all that I had for today. So if I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.